I am honestly so excited to talk to you. I've been wanting to do an interview with you for so long. Jamil Jivani, politician, an author, and really at this point in time too, you've been doing something really cool. I would classify it as starting a movement in Canada. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, we've called it Restore the North. The idea is that young people are facing unique challenges in Canada today, and we need to draw attention to that, especially for young men, because a lot of the issues young men are facing just aren't being talked about. A lot of young men don't know how to talk about what's going on in their lives either. And so we want to sort of create the space to draw attention to these issues and encourage young people not to feel hopeless or helpless, but that they can play an active role in determining where this country goes next.
I saw some clips on your YouTube page. I think it was some shorts from, I think it was last night, and it was so powerful. Do you feel as though that is deeply resonating with some people who maybe have felt kind of left behind?
Yeah, I mean, part of what I worry about is that young people and young men in particular are going to see that they've done everything they thought was right. They worked hard, they went to school, and yet they can't get ahead in life. And that I worry they're going to internalize that and say, well, it's my fault. I'm not doing it right. And what we're trying to do is say, no, it's not. Like, there's bigger challenges in our country that you can be part of fixing. And if you fix those, we can get back to a place where your hard work pays off. So I think that's what's resonating, is this sense of a lot of people feeling like maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe it's my fault. And we're trying to say, no, like, there's a whole way we can move forward where you don't have to shoulder that burden on your own. And I think a lot of young men need to hear that message.
You know, kind of hearing that, it makes me think a lot of the difference with what I would best describe as like this ideological takeover, where there's so many people pulling you in different directions, but ultimately there's also just what you're feeling and what you're dealing with. And instead of people listening and helping and caring and being compassionate, you almost get shamed for really just saying I'm struggling. And I think, you know, there's so many young people, especially online, men and women, everybody's affected by this. But if you ever post something about, you know, something going on in your life, something politically, you'll almost always just get this slew of comments that'll be like, oh, well, I have all this money in my savings account. Well, you must have just not worked hard enough. So there's all of this like pressure that's just never ending. And I can't even imagine how difficult that must be. I can't imagine it to an extent. This is something I'm incredibly familiar with, but you know, for you to be speaking out the way that you are, it's unfortunate that it's something really controversial these days. And I'm wondering, for you, you've been talking about this for years and years. Do you have an idea at this point in time why it is that discussing anything about young men in particular is really controversial and criticized, but if you want to talk about feminism, it's celebrated? Why is there that difference in our culture?
Well, a big part of the cultural challenge here is that many of us have internalized, whether we know it or not, a certain view of whose grievances and whose experiences get to be heard and whose don't. And often that's based on a certain interpretation of history. So if you sort of take this look that being part of one identity group has historical privileges, being part of another identity group does not. We sort of think, well, if you're part of this historically privileged group, then somehow you don't get to complain. But it's not a real way that life works, right? Your race, your gender, your culture, your religion does not determine whether you have a hard go of it in life today or not. You know, if you look at who's under the poverty line, who's unemployed, who's dealing with addictions or homelessness, all of us can be affected by this. And so the idea that we culturally say, well, some people get to share those experiences and some people don't. Some people get to ask for help and some people don't. It's wrong. It's unethical in my view, but it also means we're not solving any of the problems. This is why I go out of my way to point out things like DEI or, you know, the woke stuff, why it actually holds us back from solving problems. Because if you believe that you know someone's life based on what they look like or where their parents come from, you're going to miss out on a huge piece of what's going on in the country right now.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting hearing you kind of talk about all this. And the one thought that keeps going through my head is, man, you sound like a really traditional liberal with how compassionate and kind you are and just how well-spoken and articulate you are. You've obviously put a lot of deep thought into this. And then that makes me wonder, when it comes to politics, like, it is the craziest thing to me. Obviously, I'm conservative, but it is the craziest thing to watch question periods so frequently, to watch press conferences. And when conservatives are going out so frequently, they're saying the things that really matter, like affordability, that matters. Like, when is the last time that a liberal went and did a big press conference about MAID, or did a big press conference about homelessness or food insecurity? They don't do that ever. It's the Conservative Party doing that, yet somehow conservatives are so villainized and shamed for talking about what matters. And I'm wondering for you in the House of Commons especially, and share what you can here, but what is that like, having to sit across from people who claim to be all of these things, yet the evidence, their actions are so, they're just not, they don't line up at all. Like, they can say all the right things, but they don't do them. They don't push for them. They're not holding press conferences to raise awareness for them. And then they turn around and say that you're the bad guy, as an example. Like, what is that like?
Oh, it's very frustrating. Sometimes I feel like my job in Ottawa is to have a front row seat to observe the destruction of my country, which is very infuriating at times. The reality is that, because the Liberals have been in power for so long, they have to own the status quo, but they cannot argue to the Canadian people that the status quo is good. They cannot convince the average person in our country that their life is better off now than it was a decade ago. And so how do they balance that? Well, they just pretend they're not responsible for anything. Not a single decision of the last decade do they apologize for or take ownership of. And they treat us like we have the memory of a goldfish, where they can go from saying the carbon tax is essential to stop the melting of our planet, to then going, well, we don't need the carbon tax anymore, and how dare you even bring it up? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a weird way of doing politics, but it's the way they do it, and thus far it has worked for them. I long for the day where enough Canadians believe they deserve better, that they will hold the Liberals accountable for their 10 plus years of a record where things have just gotten worse.
So maybe I'll kind of pivot ever so slightly to that point, because your Restore the North tour that you're doing, your goal with it, I had read, was that you wanted to go to as many campuses as possible. And so I'm wondering, with that, let's say, you're in a lecture hall and you have a whole bunch of students there who have been taught and trained their whole life. Their entire social media algorithm is saying that conservatives are the worst thing in the world. They're super vile. What exactly would it be that you would say to them at that point to try to bring them back in? Like, what is that wake up moment that you have to really build some more unity and a way better understanding of what it means to be a conservative in 2025?
Yeah, well, a big part of what we try to do really is first to listen and to show people, like, we're not these raving ideologues that don't care what you have to say. All Canadians can have a voice in a country where conservatives are in power, and there's a place for everybody. The second thing that I try to show them is that a lot of their concerns with the status quo, especially young people, they know things aren't working well. I mean, they might not be conservative, but they certainly have a sense of, the establishment's not working for them. They can see that, their future is not as bright as it should be with the current economy in place. And so we just try to show them, like, okay, you have concerns. If you want to challenge the status quo, if you want to challenge the establishment, we are your option. Because the establishment is the Liberal Party. It is the liberal institution. It is the people who have been trying to dictate to young people for many years now how they should talk and what they should say and what political correctness is and how to deal with the realities of life. And we are the only party saying, no, that's not working. So join us to figure out what we should do next. I believe that for our generation, the people who are, occupying this great country today, to be a conservative is to be someone who recognizes Canada is a special country because of decisions that were made in the past. And to remain a special place, we have to honor those decisions, whether it's free speech, free markets, the ability for people to own a home and get ahead in life, to be independent from the government and not require the government's assistance in order to provide for your family. These are the things that make Canada special. And what we're trying to say to young people is, let's build on that foundation, because the alternative is that we are going to destroy the very things that made our country a special place to begin with.
This might be a little risky, but I'm going to ask anyway. Do you feel as though universities and some of the institutions that we have are producing thinkers or that they are producing activists?
Well, it's probably a mix of both. I certainly wouldn't want to say there are no thinkers on university campuses, but I do think, and we had this exchange actually with some students at the University of Guelph recently, where they had identified feeling like they don't get to hear the other side of these important debates. And what we talked about was that that's actually not good for their education. Regardless of whether they agree with the other side or not, you need to know what the other side is saying to contend with that in the real world. And I think that's where universities are often failing young people, is they're just not preparing them for real life. I mean, if you believe that every person in the country has the same view on transgenderism, for example, and that you can't even hear the other side, well, you're not going to be prepared to deal with real life where people have different points of view. And that's how you become an effective person, regardless of where your career takes you, is you understand where people are coming from and you figure out how to communicate with them. That's what's missing on campuses. And I think a lot of, free thinking university students know that that's missing. And that's why they're coming to events like what we host. They're probably watching shows like yours. They want to see another point of view, and we just need to make sure we're giving it to them.
It actually makes me feel honored, but also incredibly sad how frequent it is that I'll have young women in particular who will come to me. They'll, send me a direct message, or sometimes if I'm out and about, I watch your show all the time. You speak for me. You say the things that I wish I could say. And it's an honor to hear things like that. But it's one of those things that makes me even hungrier to keep fighting for what needs to be changed, because we're supposed to live in a democracy, and in a democracy, you need to be able to have multiple schools of thought. And human beings, in order to figure out where we're at, we often talk about things. Sometimes we have bad ideas and sometimes we have great ideas. And sometimes a good idea can become a bad idea after you think about it a little bit more, and vice versa, right? And it's really sad to me the way that the political landscape in Canada has become. And I'm curious on your thoughts here. I don't even know if you have an answer to this, but I'm just trying to work this one out. When I've been to the United States plenty of times in my life, and when I see their political culture, even amongst their youth, it could be better in some areas, sure, but you have people there that really know what they're fighting for. They really know what they stand for, and they are so in no matter what. Like, they really care about their democratic values, and they care about being a part of that, an active participant in it. Whereas in Canada, we just don't really have that, especially amongst youth. And I'm wondering if you being involved in politics the way that you have been, and involved on really a deeper mental way as well, when it comes to your school of thought and so many of these trigger points and whatever, why do you think that is? Like, why is Canada just this place where there is very low engagement when it comes to politics? Is it because people don't care? What is it?
It's a great question. And I do think it does vary regionally. Like, I get to spend some time in Quebec as part of my job, and you certainly do feel a certain sense of engagement in Quebec, especially with their provincial politics, because for many Quebecers, that is also like national politics, right? But you are right that we want to see young people more engaged. And one of the barriers to that, I believe, is there's a whole generation of young people who have grown up through the education system, seeing Canada just trashed on a routine basis, seeing our flag flown at half-mast as due to historical injustices, and being told our country is systemically racist, and just this sense that it became virtuous at a certain point to badmouth Canada. And if you want young people to be patriotic and engaged and believe in what we're doing here, you can't do that. And I think in some ways it was a sign that a lot of Liberals just took our country for granted, that you could treat it that way and sort of run its reputation through the mud and there wouldn't be consequences. And then to see that same political party manifest itself as the party of nationalism in the lead up to the last election, kind of mind-blowing stuff, but they pulled their U-turn off, right?
It happened so fast.
It did very quickly. It was Christmas, and all of a sudden we had a new prime minister.
All of a sudden, I took down the Christmas tree, and everybody had Canadian flags up that they would have yelled at me for putting up in my yard a couple months prior. It was the craziest thing.
Yeah. So I don't want to judge anyone else's patriotism, but what I do want to say is that if you do believe in Canada and you do believe we should be a strong and independent nation, then let's teach our young people that and encourage them. And it should be a point of honor, for example, for a young person to be joining our armed forces. They shouldn't be stories that, we've got reservists having to visit food banks, right? I mean, these are clear things we could do to instill a greater sense of pride in young people, and we should do them.
Do you feel as though, or have you noticed that in Canada, almost from the establishment, and when I say establishment, I'm referring to, some of those like elite politicians, some of the people who are running our schools and things like that, like really high status people. That's what I'm referring to when I talk about it here. But do you think that it was some sort of and of course we're hypothesizing here because we don't know the answer, but that there was some sort of this like malicious intent, something more nefarious going on to make it so that particularly young people in Canada would grow up and really not have a good idea of who they were or what they were fighting for? Do you think that that was all intentional in the way that things have happened? And, you talk about DEI policies and these things where, merit is actually really cool. Being treated equally is awesome. It's a great thing. We should want everybody to be treated as good as we are, right? And it makes me wonder a lot of times when you see just, year after year, so many things that kind of get avoided or skirted by, these things that people don't care about that they should really care about, and the things that they really care about that they shouldn't care about that much. Like, it's just chill out. Do you think that that was intentional, or do you think that that is actually just pure incompetence and perhaps ego, where you don't want to reverse course because you don't want to admit defeat?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know what is intentional or not, but what I do know is that the, let's say, denigration of our history, the denigration of what makes Canada special and unique, accompanied a way of globalizing politics. So if you look at like, why did we come to a point where our government could say that undermining our own natural resources was good? Was because they told us it was the best thing for the globe, it was the best thing for the environment, it was the best thing for everybody else, even though it wasn't the best thing for us. And enough Canadians accepted it that they could get away with that. And it's been years and years and years of that way of thinking. So certainly I think that, these two things are not unrelated. If you convince people that you shouldn't be nationalistic in your thinking, and you sell them on a set of policies that just say, don't put your own nation's interests first, those two things go hand in hand. And so whether it was their intention or not, I do think that we're seeing the consequences of that way of thinking right now, which is that we've got a generation of young people who don't know if the future in this country is going to be bright, despite the fact that we should have all the reasons to convince our young people that we can have an amazing economy for decades to come. And now we're put in the position of how do we convince them that things can change so that they will have that bright future and that our country will put its own interests first and not some nebulous sense of the global interests that they say is necessary to save our environment.
It's kind of funny because Mark Carney, he had flown down to Egypt the other day, and I did some math, and I learned that the emissions from the private jet that he was on was the equivalent to about 9 to 11 years of the average Canadian's output, and for up to 11 years of their life from that one trip.
Wow.
And so,
not surprised.
As I've always said, I'll start taking it seriously when they do. It's when it comes to speaking to young people about this as well, have you found that there's a lot of resistance? I don't know what word I want to use, but almost like there's something indoctrinated. There we go. That's an intense word, but that's the word I'm trying to get at for the most part. But do you find that there's some people that truly like steadfast believe this stuff? Like the stuff that you're kind of calling out, and it's really a lot of common sense. There's a lot of science and data behind what you're saying. It's not like it's coming out of thin air. Do you find that there's reason there, or that there's people who just kind of naturally reject it and they don't even really know why. Like, what's the difference there?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to, like, one, exposure to different points of view. Some people, by the virtue of their family, the church they go to, the community they're part of, are going to see other ways of looking at the world, and some people are not. So that does make a big difference. But also, I think it is, it is a privileged position, to use some of the liberal language. It is a privileged position to look at the world right now, look at our country right now, and say that the status quo is good enough. I really believe that. If you can look at what's happening in our economy, if you can look at that youth unemployment rate, if you can look at the job losses and say that we're on track, you must be really sheltered from the consequences of these economic policies. And so a young person who sees that, like yesterday, for example, I met a young person who was concerned about the auto industry because historically his family has worked in the auto industry. He's not sheltered from the economic policies of today because he's seeing what's happening to his family. He can't walk around saying that the biggest issue that we have is, whether we are calling each other by the right pronouns or not, right? He can't, because his life won't let him, look past his immediate needs. But some people are privileged enough where they can walk around saying pronouns are the biggest issue that they've got. And, that's a reality of every age group, but young people deal with that too. And part of what we want to do by going on university campuses is make sure that reality is sort of anchored in this place where often things are theoretical and sort of imaginary and highfalutin, right? That we can say, well, there's real problems in the world. And the question that I think university students should be asking is giving these universities your tuition every year better preparing you to solve the world's problems or not? And I think that would be a good education.
When do you think it was that disagreement became hate speech in our country? Not even just our country, in the UK is another example too. There's been some pretty interesting policies coming out of Australia as well. But when did that happen, and why did that happen?
I don't know if I could pinpoint, because I look back at like the late 1990s with Prime Minister Chrétien, and the way he talked about free speech, if you transported him to today, he'd sound like a conservative. Like, there was a time where free speech was something that everybody thought was important. And there wasn't this weird desire to want to control what someone else can say or see or read the way that it feels like we're contending with today. I think one of the differences, if I look back at Chrétien's time to where we are now, is that a lot of policy and political views have now become intertwined with identity, and that makes it much more difficult for someone to not take it personally. Like, I'm a black man. If as a black man, I'm supposed to have certain political views, and then you disagree with me, well, now all of a sudden my identity is being sort of brought into question. And I think that's the kind of stuff that makes it more personal. And that's when the hate speech thing sort of becomes more normalized, where if you take it personally and you take disagreement as an affront to who you are as a person, well, now all of a sudden, how do we have a healthy conversation? So that's the difference, I think, between now and Chrétien's days. But where that started, I don't know if I could tell you. I feel like when I was finishing up university and law school, I could see it coming, but it wasn't quite there. But once we got to like the mid 2010s, it feels like it started to become pretty normal.
Mm-hmm. It's actually interesting hearing you say some of that because, and maybe this isn't politically correct for me to say, but it was my experience, so I'm going to share it. But when you speak about like, if I'm a black man, I'm expected to kind of behave or act a certain way, believe in a certain set of things. I remember just before the President Trump's win in the U.S., I was in the States and I was down south, and I had been speaking with people, and I like to pick brains. And so especially if I'm somewhere where nobody knows me, I'm going to pick your brain. I'm going to ask my Uber driver the weirdest questions because I just want to get a sense of what's going on. And I remember I had asked everybody that I possibly could, who are you voting for? Who do you plan to vote for? What's your, what do you think of so-and-so? And it was really eye-opening to me, and also one of my friends that I was with who is not political at all, how it was every single African-American said that every one of them, there wasn't a single one who didn't, every one of them said that they planned to vote for Trump because Trump made their life more affordable. And I was like, that is not what mainstream media would have had me believe coming out of you. Cool. I mean, that's awesome. Great. Yeah, good for you. I wish you all the best, right? And it was only Caucasians that I spoke to who said that they were voting for Democrats, orange man bad, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, it was so interesting, because it's just so different than what people want you to believe. And it really makes me wonder why there's so much going on where we don't have that full story. And then they defend that there's this full story. And I'm wondering too, we have some issues when it comes to DEI policies in Canada, and the research is out. The data has shown it doesn't work. It actually hinders a lot, and it makes things really challenging. And I think on a societal level too, it's pretty harmful in many ways. I personally don't like to view anybody else as being less advantaged than me simply because of how they look or how they identify. Do you think that those types of policies will ever actually be reversed in Canada?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I really believe it because I think a lot of people at one point were convinced that it was going to lead to a more just society. The people who maybe let their guard down and thought, okay, maybe this is not so bad. Well, we've seen the evidence. It's not led to a more just society. In fact, people's lives have gotten harder. So I don't think Liberals can convince Canadians that these policies work, that they've made anyone's life better. Maybe it's helped a few people get appointed to a corporate board of directors on Bay Street, or a few university professors get tenure. But the average person, regardless of what you look like or where you come from, your life's not gotten better under this DEI woke regime. And I think it's going to change. I really do. And I long for the day where we get back to believing that the right way to help people is to help them get ahead, regardless of what they look like, where people are given assistance based on their needs, not based on where they come from, or, their skin color. And where we believe that a good society is one where fewer people need special treatment because they're independent and they're doing awesome and they're starting businesses and they're making money and they don't need the government to hold their hand.
I want to pivot just a little bit over to faith, which is something you've been very outspoken on. Do you think that in many cases, not necessarily just in Canada, I think that we can see these patterns in other parts of the world as well, but do you think that there is some sort of an ideological motivation to replace God with government? Do you think that holds up at all? Especially, you mentioned in your last sentence there how people kind of like expecting things from the government, getting handouts, things like that. Do you see a correlation there at all?
Well, look, I think that people who believe in God or have their own strong moral convictions are strong people. And I think that there are certainly political ideologies that don't want people to be strong and independent. They'd rather people be more dependent on them. Take, for example, the National School Food Program, right? The Liberals have announced they're continuing to fund it. I think most people think a good society would be one where every mom and dad can provide lunch for their own children. And the fact that that's not true right now because too many people are struggling in the economy, that should be fixed. The idea that the very same government that has created an economy where you can't provide for your kids is now saying, well, we're going to save you by giving your kid lunch. That's kind of twisted to me, right? And so when we talk about believing in God, I mean, I do believe that like there's a sense that comes from strong conviction that you want to be independent. You believe that the government is not the greatest thing over you, but in fact, there's something greater than all of us. And you want to be held accountable to that. And that puts the government in its right place. It's not the Lord over the people. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's supposed to serve the people. So I do think that there are some real problems that come from governments not knowing their place in society, and their place is to serve us. It's not to lord over us.
Do you think that there's validity to many claims, I've seen this all over the internet, that Abrahamic faiths are certainly not, they're becoming controversial almost in Canada?
Well, look, it depends, I guess, on where you are. Like if you attend a church or a synagogue or a mosque, it's not controversial to believe in the scripture of your forefathers, right? The scripture of your faith. But certainly to people who maybe don't respect that, And I do think if you look at the assaults on religious freedom in this country, there are people who just frankly don't respect these traditions. You will see that, I think it's controversial to them. The idea that you could say wisdom of the past should shape how we make decisions in the future. That's a tough thing for someone to wrap their head around if they believe that history was full of, bigots and horrible people. And today's, bureaucrat in Ottawa is the most enlightened human that's ever existed, and therefore should be making all of our decisions for us. It's a different mentality, right? And I am, of course, of the belief that, there's wisdom to gain from the past. I think that's part of being a conservative. And even if you take the religious elements of it out, the people who built this country did a great job, and we should be trying to replicate their success and protect it. But if you believe that our history is something to apologize for, then you feel entitled to just destroy whatever you want and think that you're smart enough to rebuild it on your own. And that never works, and it should not be tried. But it is a mentality behind a lot of the political ideologies that seem to want to distance us from our past.
If a young man today, came up to you and kind of shared with you all of his thoughts and how all the names and stuff that people get, I'm sure you see this and have even experienced this yourself, like how, oh, well, you're toxic and you're an ist, you're a phobe, you're a this, you're a that. Oh, well, you don't support women. And there's so many slurs that get thrown at young people, young men in particular, whenever they speak out. And it's caused them to be really complacent and at times perhaps sacrifice more in a really unfair way. And the ripple effect of that has been really significant. And I think a lot of that has to do with perhaps some lack of meaning and value in life. And there may be some room in there as well to suggest that that lack of meaning and value in life can come from really just struggling and trying to fit in and belong in a world that seems to just not be there for you anymore due to a lot of cultural pressure, I would argue, is the primary one there. But what is there left to be, I guess, is kind of the question for young people in particular who get all these slurs, but they feel something inside. They know that what's going on isn't right. But they know that if they speak about it, they may risk being ostracized or excluded. They may not be able to get to go on that date with that pretty lady. Who knows? What is there left for them to be at that point in time? And how would you kind of go about explaining to them why it's so very important for them to keep holding on and to keep fighting the good fight, even though it can feel at times like everything is against you?
Well, what I would say to him is, people need purpose. And sometimes when we're at our darkest moments, it's when we feel we are the most distant from having a purpose. And I think sometimes our purpose can feel like a big, huge thing. Sometimes it can be as small as, fixing up the garage, but be busy, find purpose, find ways to add value to the people around you, to your community, to your friends, whomever it may be. The bigger thing, though, that I would say is to really see what's happening around our country now as an opportunity, that we are in a place where we need to build a future for this country. We need to solve big problems. We need to address things. And I want young men in particular, but all young people, to feel like there's a place for them in this effort. And so if they feel alone or they feel isolated or they don't know who they can talk to about the things that are going on in their lives, I would hope that we are demonstrating there's a lot of people who want to change things. And if you think things are not right and you think things need to change, you're far from alone in that. Maybe in your individual circumstances you feel alone, but you're not really. If it were up to me, I'd make sure that every young man across the country has a friend and a role model and a mentor who could help guide them through these things. And there are programs and organizations that try to do that. But the best thing I can try to do is sort of point people to the possibility that things are going to get better, because I do believe they can. And anyone who's listening to this who kind of relates to what you're saying, I would just say, please reach out to us. I don't say that lightly. We hear from young men all the time, every day, and we do our absolute best to make sure that we're connecting them, because you got to have relationships and you got to have people around you care about you and show you how to move forward in the right way. And as best as we can to be a connector in guiding young men in the right places, we are happy to take on that responsibility.
Another risky one. Sorry. I promise it's the last. What would you say to people? Because, hearing you say all of that, I completely agree. I've been very open with some of the tragedy in my life, and it's 100% the reason why I started talking about politics, because at that point in time, I had been to hell and back, and there is not a single thing anybody can take from me anymore. And so when you speak the way that you do about these things, I feel it, to the point where I saw the message that you gave to young men in the House of Commons, and I cried. I watched it several times and I cried while watching it, because it was so, gosh, I just can't tell you how many times I've heard that same thing. And unfortunately, what happened. And so that's why I think it's so important for you to be doing the work that you are, and to be somebody too who's just really strong and clear in your convictions. It's so needed. But with that then comes the really frequent smearing of, oh, well, you're a radical, you're an extremist, you're an all of those other words that people use to describe people who are conservative, who really just want life to feel hopeful again in some ways. And it's not like every single day is filled with doom and gloom and 100% of circumstances. But what message would you say to the people who would hear something like what you just said and respond back to it by calling you some sort of names, by trying to categorize you in some way so that people don't take as much out of the message you're trying to convey?
Yeah, I mean, my general philosophy is, if you have a problem with me trying to help young men, I just don't really care what you think. I mean, I don't want to sound dismissive, but the reality is, like, I just think there's so many people who need positivity that every second I'm giving to someone who's trying to tear away at that it just feels like an opportunity cost, right? I mean, there's only so much time in every day. Big part of my job is, we try to serve everybody that we possibly can in our community, right? In my community of Bowmanville, Oshawa North. And that's my responsibility. But I also believe that, there's a lot, I can never reach as many people as I wish I could. There's always going to be that young man that I wish I could have called. I wish I could have spoken to, whether it's directly or through a video or something, and I won't get to. And if I've got that extra spare time in the day, that's who I want to try to give that time to. I'm just not interested in wasting my time with people who are going to make bad faith arguments, right? And that's the reality that I think we have to accept. There are some people who disagree with us because they genuinely disagree with us. And for those people, they deserve to be heard. Mm-hmm. But there are people who are just making bad faith arguments, right? Like, I mean, if I say that we need to help boys because far too many boys are, entering the justice system and having addiction issues and becoming homeless later on in life and not being able to get a job, and your response to that is, but you're only talking about boys. It's like, all right, well, I'm not saying you can't talk about everybody else. Mm-hmm. But I think it would be fair to say that in our society today, a lot of these boys aren't getting the attention they deserve. And if, as a member of parliament, I can draw attention to that, of course I'm going to do that.
Just on that note, it's really crazy if you ever go and look at unaliving yourself statistics and how sharply they have increased in some age categories over the last 5 to 7 years. It's crazy. It's crazy considering how much there is for women's mental health, women empowerment. There's all these things for women. And of course, sure, it should be fair and equal though too, shouldn't it? And it's not fair and equal if somebody's getting left behind. And so for that, I just wanted to thank you again and to say that I just so deeply admire you and appreciate what you're doing in ensuring that nobody gets left behind, because that's exactly what we're trying to conserve. We're trying to conserve that feeling, right? We want everybody to feel really good and happy and capable. And it's really hard when things feel like they're against you. And for you to be speaking out the way that you have been for so long, it has touched more people than I think you could ever possibly know. So thank you.
Oh, that's very kind of you. And honestly, I feel like I need to match your vulnerability here. So I want to say, I have been in bad places in my life, and I think sometimes when you're in the public spotlight or you're an MP or whatever, people just kind of see you at your highlight moments. But I was a person who hated myself in high school, failed every class, failed the literacy test. I had stage 4 cancer at one point, thought I might die, and was close to giving up on myself. I've been through divorce, which was honestly the worst experience of my life. And every time I've been in those places, I've seen other people down there. It's like you go down in the cave and you see there's other people there too. And I think like the idea that should be complicated to address, I'm never going to accept it,
Mm-hmm.
And I think it takes like a real effort to normalize talking about these things so that when people are in tough spots, they know they're being heard and understood. And I commend you for what you've done to signal that to other people. I'm sure there are many people, some of whom I know personally, who have seen you talk about these tough things and admire you for it. I share that, and I appreciate you. And anybody who, is listening and watching who can relate, whether personally or, indirectly, I just wanted to say, like, just keep fighting, keep going. Don't let anything take you down.
Jamil Jivani, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.